guys, we've talked about the philosophical aspect of community so far, and I am pretty sure a lot of these guys would also want to go ahead and build some communities of their own. So I would want you to give us a couple of advices that you'll give to a young chap who's trying to build out a community for themselves. Maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, so I think there'd be two things that are really important when you're trying to start a community. I think the first, you need to make sure what is the entry criteria for your community, right? I think one of the big mistakes that people make is you optimize for the vanity metric of number of members or number of people following your Twitter account or number of people in your Discord server. And most of these communities just end up as ghost towns beyond a point, right? Either when like the price isn't going up anymore or once the market cools down, right? I think it's really important to have a filter to make sure that you don't end up letting garbage in, which is just not interested, right? It's not, if you have folks who are just basically entering your server with the hope that you're gonna like pump this NFT or pump this coin or something magic, somebody else is going to do something that is going to make me rich. Right? That is the kind of person you don't want in, mostly you should not want in your community, right? So it's really important to have some kind of filtration criteria. At Superteam, for example, anyone can enter through proof of work, right? So you just share a link to a working product that you build. Either if you're an engineer, can be a working product. If you're a designer or a writer, can be a link to something that you've designed or you've built. That's the only criteria. You can also apply to win a grant through Superteam and then enter and then build your proof of work, right? So it's build around earning and like earning and working, right? And that is so, and therefore like the 150, 160 members which are there, we all know that, okay, anyone who has come here has proven that they can and will work in Web3. And so then there's a base level of trust that gets established, as opposed to any other community where, if let's say, for example, you have to buy X amount of tokens to enter, right? I mean, you have some filter, but maybe not a very good filter, because now you just know that you have people who have some amount of wealth. You don't know what their intent is, what their level of commitment is, what their effort is, right? And the worst thing in like building a community is to build one where everybody expects the other person to do something for them, right? And that's the second thing, is that like governance is overrated, right? And if you see, most communities end up with like the system of proposals and voting. So there's a token, you have to stake the token, you get a new token for staking the token, and then you have to vote with the stake token, and then you can burn the token, and like all that is unnecessary noise, right? Like it's ridiculous that in a community, if you want to like issue business cards, someone has to pass a proposal and someone has to vote, right? That's not what like a community or Web3 is about, right? So most people now, even those who started off with voting, are moving to vote for a subgroup or a sub DAO in a way that they can operate independently, right? So don't optimize for governance early on. We have zero governance at Superteam, so there's no token, there's no treasury. You can form teams with anyone, you can work with them, you can have a hierarchy within the team. So you have a project lead for that period of time and you dissolve again, right? The key principle is, I don't tell you what to do and you don't tell me what to do, right? We just do whatever we want to do within like the community. It also helps when times are bad or things like that, because you don't want, like, for example, if someone buys your token and enters, then they're expecting a return, right? And maybe rightfully so. So you don't want to end up in that situation where you're obliged to do something for them, then, unless you're building a specific type of community where it makes sense. The really interesting backstory behind how we ended up with governance tokens is that like folks who started out in the US, they needed to do this to make sure that they were in compliance with their securities law. And this is something I learned from one of the co-founders at Superteam, Akshay. If you guys have heard of him, he had shared this very interesting anecdote that if you're starting out in the US and you're issuing a token and you're like doing something for that, you're basically construed to be management, and the token holders are your shareholders, and then you're selling unregistered securities and you can go to jail for that, right? So this was like a legal innovation to come up with like a governance token to bypass that. It's not something that's required for every like community to exist. So those will be the two things. One is be very clear on who can come in based on what criteria, and second is optimize for speed of decision making and not like governance.
Makes sense. I mean, so the two key takeaways being, of course, know why you're building one, and then, of course, don't fuss about things like governance. They will take care of themselves. You just have to focus on why you're doing and what you're doing. And what about you, Ankur? What do you have to say on that?
So just to add on the governance part before I give my 3 bits. So at Unit Network, we do the same thing. We don't have a governance mechanism yet. We have sub teams, and each sub team is led by 2 individuals, and they are entirely responsible for the decisions they take, whether right or wrong. That's irrelevant. But so so I completely agree with you on the governance, because we end up just like wasting our time and energy on voting and like seeing what the next step should be rather than taking action, especially early on for a project or a community. It's action is more important. But coming to someone who wants to start off a new community, first I would say, why do you want to start off a new community? Right, get your reason right. So that automatically answers the purpose, and then that would filter that who you want to bring or attract to your community, and then what you want to add value to. So get your purpose right. Don't create a community just because it's cool and it's happening and stuff. Get a niche. That's the second point. So like we have a Bitcoin Bombay group. We have multiple other. There are communities only for investments. There are communities only for research. There are communities only for specific projects. So get your niche. And the third point would be real, be genuine, and add value to your community in a genuine way. So that would be my
No,
3 points.
absolutely. This couldn't have been summed up better. So, while we are on it, I'll just like to give a couple of examples. Some communities that have added value to my life, definitely. Superteam DAO definitely being one of them. You have to show your proof of work to enter the community as a contributor. I think you call it contributor.
Yeah, so there's 2 levels. There's like contributor and member. So it's more fluid. If you want to just come in and work and leave, you can be a contributor. And then member is like if you contribute a few times and you want to stick around longer, you can then apply to be a member. But both are through proof of work or winning
Right.
grants.
So there's this another, like I think it's called lurker. So which is where you just hang in the Discord server and maybe check out if there are any bounties in place which you can be a part of. So that's absolutely very thought provoking, I would say. We constantly come up with so I write for passion as well, and of course there are certain gigs that keep on floating around, and every time someone comes up to me and asks me that if I want to write on a certain topic or not, they just start up with what is blockchain, what is difference between Bitcoin, blockchain. Those topics are definitely important. I'm not saying that they're not, but idea is that how do you go past them? And that's one community where I found that the topics are really thought provoking. They would ask you to apply certain Web2 techniques to understand, and Aditya also wrote a piece on it.
Crypto products and NFTs are unregulated and can be highly risky. There may be no regulatory recourse for any loss from such transactions. In case you have any queries, write to support@coindcx.com.